I love how there's a stray bandana here. It's kind of a hint. I'm not blind, am I? As the religious leaders say at the end. Surely I'm not blind. Thank you, choir. So this story it opens with a healing of physical blindness. And there are many instances of Jesus healing physical ailments, including blindness, not just in the Gospel of John, across all the Gospels. So we celebrate this healing of physical blindness. And we pray for people today who have struggles with sight and blindness and all of that. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayers. Yet Jesus' healing of the physical blindness with mud, I know you like that part, and saliva. Jesus' healing of the physical blindness only takes place across a few verses. And this is a very long story. It's 41 verses long, and we shortened it up in our reading today. The physical blindness healing quickly pivots to a neighborhood story, and we called it the bandana neighborhood, because the man was healed, and then immediately the neighbors showed up and said, "This guy? Don't we know him? Wasn't he the beggar? Wasn't he blind? Wasn't he a mess? Nah, couldn't be him." The neighbors had, instead of celebrating, they had a debate about what's going on here. And they couldn't trust their instincts, so they went and got their overlords, the religious authorities. And the religious authorities came in and analyzed the man, or the small group, as we saw in Time for Discovery today. The religious authorities took a look at this healing and said, "Nah, this happened on the Sabbath. No healing happened here. It's some kind of fraud." But the religious authorities were curious enough. They're like, "Let's talk to the parents." So parents are supplied. And the parents also didn't see the healing and celebrate. It's kind of like they were called into court. The parents said, "Yes, this is our son. Yes, born blind. So this is no fraud here. Born blind. Seems to be healed now, but we don't know how. You'll have to ask our son. We don't know." And they take a step back. Go ask him. And then the story provides that they didn't want to say anything because they were afraid of the religious authorities. And because they were afraid of the religious authorities, the issue was they thought they could be thrown out of good society. So, they're like, "Don't ask us," kind of throwing their son under the bus. "Go ask our son." So the religious authorities go and question the man who was blind and healed one more time. Then they kind of up their interrogation tactics. The religious authorities say to the man, this man is a sinner, right?" And the man's like, "Well, I don't know if he's a sinner or not. All I do know is that I've been healed." And then the religious authorities are like, "Wow, how did that happen? How did that happen?" And the person says, "Didn't I already tell you that? Mud. I already told you that, didn't I? Could it be you guys want to be the healer's disciples?" Boy, oh boy, the religious authorities weren't having that as a thing. "How dare you say that we are that person's disciples? You're his disciples, and we follow Moses. We know what we're doing. How dare you?" The man speaks again. "Well, if you know so much about Moses, how come you don't see the healer for what he is? What's up with that?" "Oh, The religious authorities were even more put off by that. You are a sinner. Oh, the big loaded word. You are a sinner. How dare you? I can't believe you're insulting us. And they drove the man out of society. Just as the parents feared what happened to them, the religious authorities did to the blind man. He was driven out of good society. And then after he was driven out, who appears again but Jesus? Jesus comes up to the man in his ostracization. He was thrown out, his shunning. Jesus comes up and said, I'm the Son of Man. And the man says, I believe it. And there's this beautiful moment. Meanwhile, the religious authorities end today with saying, we're not blind, are we? So, Gospel of John very cleverly springboards a physical healing of blindness into talk about spiritual, social, and mental blindness. Spiritual, social, and mental blindness are a thing. Let's absorb that. It's a hard thing to get at lots of times. When we do Bible stories or if we learn Bible stories, often traditionally as a kid, they're very simple stories here and there, and they have nouns and verbs and actions. But darn it, a lot of Bible stories are about social, spiritual, and mental blindness. Old Testament, New Testament. Matthew's gospel really gets hot under the collar about spiritual blindness. Matthew chapter 5, also Matthew chapter 23, Jesus really goes after not just spiritual, social, mental blindness, but what he calls blind guides. So there's blindness, mental, spiritual, social blindness. That's a problem. But then, take it to the next level exponentially. What happens if the blind person is a guide, a teacher, a moral leader? Then you've got trouble. Think about this if this has happened to you. Sometimes you're in a situation and you're doing problem solving. How are we going to solve this problem? Situation A. So you kind of define what the problem is, you talk to other people, then you surface what are possible solutions to this problem, what are other sources of information to figure out this problem. You kind of learn and brainstorm, then you might experiment, try things out, might work, might not work. So that's one lane that's pretty normative for human beings. But then there's another lane. When you're just trying to solve problems, you quickly find out that you can't just say anything out loud because so-and-so's ego might get hurt. Or in such and such a situation, that is seen as fighting words. And you learn, ooh, I better not say anything. Or how do I run this play? Or you walk on eggshells, and then sometimes you just kind of have to bend toward the will of the person or the group or whatever the dynamic is there. It's not really about, open-heartedly solving problems. It becomes more about social engineering. Pretty tricky thing. So there's different, there's A, what we learn in school and engineering and this is a great way, business, how you solve problems. And then there's B, the reality of social dynamics. I'll say it simply in this way. There's A and then there's B. Can we just call it a dysfunctional situation? A dysfunctional system. And there's all different levels of that dysfunction. And there's always a little piece of dysfunction everywhere. Nothing's perfect. But sometimes you can't talk about it as openly. But in this dysfunctional system, you got to be careful. There's egos. There's people who need to win. It's really not about the bigger picture. Kind of reminds me of a TV show. Did any of you ever watch The Office? So The Office is about a dysfunctional workplace, and it's just so funny because they kind of keep straight faces, and the boss, what is his name, Michael? And everybody in the office place has to kind of like kiss up to Michael, and Michael is such a terrible boss, and he's so vain, and it's just all about him, and everybody else is just trying to get the paper company to function well. John's Gospel in chapter 9, instead of calling it the office, it's called the neighborhood. John very cleverly tries to get his readers, his first listeners, to get inside a dysfunctional situation. The man was healed. The next thing should be celebration, but not so fast. The neighbors are in a dysfunctional situation where they can't believe what they see and they hear. They have to check with their overlords to make sure they understand it's okay, that their own sensory perceptions are correct, because they don't want to get it wrong. So they bring in the religious overlords. The overlords start the questioning of the man. And, they start out kind of with softball questions, but you see that they already have a template in their minds of, okay, Sabbath, can't be it. So they have these broad theological things, Sabbath, and later sinner, that they used kind of as a battering ram. Sabbath, sinner. And they use them, they misuse them, I'd say. They have a false religiosity about them. Look, sinner, look, Sabbath. But then you have to step back in this system and say, and this is where it requires a higher order of thinking, critical thinking, analytical thinking here. Well, what's the purpose of Sabbath? What's the purpose of sinner? Some of these loaded terms they're using. Isn't Sabbath for the glory of God and for liberation of the people? And sinners, we're all sinners who are loved and forgiven and given new life. Isn't that the deal? But their ideas of those theological categories are ways to whack others and oppress others. They have a smaller idea about some of these things rather than to the glory of God. But they've captured enough authority that others go along with it. Okay, so yeah, they're trying to figure out what's going on. And when they have that framework, they can't see what's before their eyes. A person was healed. This is something to celebrate. Can't see it. So the man, they have round one of questioning the man, then they question the parents. And I thought, very interesting detail in this neighborhood, that the parents seem cut off from the kid. They don't try to help him out. They're not celebrating. And at the very end it says they don't want to say anything more because, do you remember, they were afraid of the religious authorities, and they feared getting thrown out of good society. So they become kind of enablers or bystanders. And then the religious authorities up the ante, pressuring the man to say, isn't that guy a sinner? That guy's a sinner. And here is where the guy, I think, is a textbook for that first Christian community in nonviolent communication. the man, when he is pressured, isn't that a sinner? Surely that man's a sinner. It would have been very easy, very scary to go along with these pushy people who had a lot of power, could do a lot of harm. It could have been very easy to say, yes, I agree with you. But the man's like, well, I don't know. He kept loose. He was not afraid. He kept honest. I don't know. But then he also declared, this is what I do know. That guy healed me. And then the religious people, took another swipe at the man. Well, how did he do that? The man still kept loose, not frightened. And then he pointed out the rhetorical pressure, the little tactic the authorities were using. You just asked me that before, didn't you? So he was not intimidated. He could see through their tactics of pressure and repeating. And maybe if I repeat this enough times, it becomes true. And the man's like, didn't you say that before? I already told you. Then I wonder, I don't know that this is the gospel writer John or that healed man when he says, do you want to be his disciples? Isn't that devilish? Isn't that provocative? He's poking at him. He's keeping good humor. He's acting innocent. Maybe the man is innocent. But I think the gospel writer John is winking and saying, keep your sense of humor. And then as a form of nonviolence, as a form of how are you in the world when it's so dysfunctional and they're oppressing you and you're not supposed to believe with your own eyes and you've experienced God and this is the right way. Oh my goodness, how very frightening it must have been for John's community. And John is writing a handbook saying, look at what this guy did. Finally, when the religious authorities, really go after him, calling him a sinner, using loaded language, and then abuse their power, they throw the man out of society. This is a big deal, and we're going to hit on this topic again. To be thrown out of society was the thing the parents feared the most for themselves, so much so they wouldn't look after their son. Imagine what it would be like to be abandoned by your entire social safety net. We're going to explore this a little bit more. The whole theme actually for this Eastertide study, we've summed it up like no one's getting left behind. We get there together, that song. But it came from John 14:18, where Jesus says, I will never leave you orphaned. They completely feared being socially abandoned. And the religious authorities, society could abandon people. That was just the worst thing imaginable. Even today, we're understanding this idea of belonging. People need belonging, even belonging to something not great, because it is so part of our social, spiritual, mental well-being. We will belong to something even when we have a blind spot, because our desire to belong is so great. We will go along, just have that thirst to belong. But this man had something greater than a thirst to belong to the dominant society he was a part of. He had a thirst to see. And he kept trying to see, remaining calm, trying to see more. And even at the very last, when he was thrown out, that's like the worst thing that could have happened. And again, for John's early readers, for Jesus' that's what they feared the most, being thrown out. He's thrown out, and then Jesus finds him. John is painting this scenario that, it's really hard to go against something dysfunctional. It's very risky. It could get you killed, thrown out, and yet Jesus is there for you. A couple weeks ago, I was listening to somebody talking about terrible things that happen in life. And he didn't mention really terrible things like, say, genocide, war, famine. But he did talk about going through a divorce, job loss, or an illness. And he said, when you go through those things, you think this is it. There's nothing more. But then you realize, maybe you had a blind spot. Maybe you were in a rut. And when you're in that situation, I think that's where Jesus meets us. You have a breakthrough and you have new life. It's possible. So I think the writer, John, is signaling that for this new community of Jesus who felt ostracized, who, what's the point? It's so discouraging, when you're in a situation that's wrong, and prayers for everybody that's in a wrong situation today or abusive situation today. You get it. It's so tricky to address. You become the problem. So John is urging his community, here are tactics you can use. And it didn't take a powerful person to address the powerful religious authorities. It took just a blind beggar. I was thinking we often are reading Paul, and Paul is such a great speaker and preacher. This is a blind beggar, only using his heart, his eyes, what he sees, his own experience, his honesty, his questions, his brain kind of seeing the logic of the arguments, humor, and courage, because he just wanted to see. And this man saw and saw. He got his blindness healed, and then he kept wanting to see. And then he saw what was going on in his neighborhood, and he saw what the religious authorities were doing. He saw what his parents did, and he didn't get discouraged that they didn't care about him. He had such a thirst to see God that in the end he saw more than anybody, because he saw Jesus, who said, I'm the Son of Man. Sip of water, I'm almost done. Friends, you have the courage to see. Let the Spirit be alive in you. To God be the glory. Amen.